said. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and everyone in the committee for having us here. My name is Scott Alexander, and I was born and raised in North Vancouver, British Columbia. I graduated from the University of Queensland School of Medicine in 2017 and returned to Canada with the intention to complete residency and practice here. But I'm now a non-licensed physician in Canada because I was unable to obtain and secure a postgraduate residency position. Now, I discovered my calling for medicine after transitioning from the University of British Columbia to Simon Fraser University, where I studied biomedical physiology and kinesiology and fell in love with the science of the human body. I started later than many applicants to medical school and faced some early setbacks, which unfortunately included playing junior hockey. A master's degree tried to strengthen my application, but did not gain me admission to Canadian medical schools. So I self-funded my own education in Australia at the personal cost of over $250,000 Canadian, intending to return home and practice here and raise my family. After graduation, I did return to Canada and start my family, and I did apply for residency positions in both family medicine and psychiatry. But after 2 unsuccessful applications, this was followed by some retroactive changes to the exam requirements that declared my exams I had taken, the MCCEE and the NAC-OSCE, were no longer acceptable, and required me to take resident-level examinations, the QED-1, before entering residency, and an updated NAC-OSCE with a new format. Now, these changes effectively erased my progress as many internationally trained Canadians like myself had made toward licensure and prevented me from applying to residency in further years. So I had to pivot, and I moved into medical affairs in the pharmaceutical industry, and for the last 8 years, I have worked to bring innovative medicine to the patients in Canada and scientific education to the physicians across the country. I do take real pride in improving patient care, but on a different scale than I had expected. This career change was not in my plans, and it does reflect some of those systemic barriers that prevent qualified Canadians trained abroad from practicing at home. Now, I'm very fortunate that I have a physician-facing role, and I get to engage with these doctors across Canada and build relationships with them. And one of the icebreakers that I typically do in introducing myself is share my story. And almost without fail, there is a shock and sympathy given my way, and immediate offers for help with things like observerships, preceptorships, or letters of recommendation. However, these offers come from the individual physicians themselves. And in discussion with them, I've come to understand that a lot of the programs do not have the capacity to take on more training. And one of the bottlenecks that I've heard does happen to be these foreign trained visas. So while these don't directly compete with residency positions, they do limit the number of supervised training positions available through the constraints of teaching capacity and the limited limited hours that physicians have for supervision. It was not something that I had considered before having these conversations with the doctors as a barrier, but on speaking with them while they're burning out and struggling with their patient care seems to come to the present front. Now, the medical school I attended was one of the largest international institutions with student bodies of 250 international students, and there were 60 Canadians in my year. So when I graduated in 2017, only 2 students tried to come back to Canada. 58 of my Canadian colleagues decided to stay in Australia and are now serving the Australian population as fully trained consultants. Many of my peers would like to return, but they do tell me that the barriers are prohibitively high and that the process lacks transparency for them. And this frustration and loss of trained clinicians to other health systems is a problem for Canada. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say that while I would like to acknowledge that Canada invests in its people, we should not be losing Canadians who have already trained and been invested in this process because it's unclear, inconsistent, or with retroactive changes.
Sorry, 37 seconds.
My personal thoughts are to remove some of these bottlenecks that come from the visa programs and the capacity constraints, to restore predictability in the assessment and licensing, to expand supervised clinical training capacity so qualified internationally trained Canadians can complete the final steps that are required here at home, And doing so will restore the fairness to individuals and their families, deliver trained clinicians where they are desperately needed, and strengthen healthcare for all Canadians. So I do ask this committee to recommend concrete time-bound measures to help make that happen. And I thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much. And now I go to the Medical Council of Canada. Dr. Naik, am I pronouncing your name properly?
Correct.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable members. Merci de l'invitation de présenter ce matin.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this morning.
I'm also a practicing anesthesiologist helping with the shortage here in the nation's capital that you heard about in previous weeks. Canada is absolutely in a crisis, and you've heard testimony and staggering figures to that effect. This isn't just a Canadian problem, it's a global problem. The World Health Organization has predicted that we will be short 10 million healthcare workers by the year 2030. The Medical Council of Canada was enacted as an Act of Parliament in 1912 to serve regulation and licensure by setting the national standard of the competencies we expect of physicians. Now, in crisis, we do see erosions of standards, and I don't think that today is the day to lower or remove standards, but we absolutely do have to modernize those standards, making them efficient, effective, and relevant. The national standard needs to evolve just like medical practice has evolved. And if we do that right, then we can maintain patient safety and, in fact, keep the public's trust. Our licentiate and our examinations are good measures that someone is ready to enter supervised practice. So I put to you that we support the national standard in three ways. One, through credential verification. Thankfully, in today's day and age, we see the incidence of fraudulence to be low, but it's not non-existent. And so this is an important check. Our tests test medical knowledge, but more importantly, the ethical and cultural considerations we'd want to see in our doctors. And recognizing no single test is going to tap all those competencies, importantly, professionalism and communication. We are leaning into assessor tools and training so we can bring valid and defensible decisions to workplace-based assessment through the practice-ready programs you discussed. Now, I said it's a global crisis. Well, inherently, that means it's also a global competition. We are going to have competition between our provinces and territories, but what we cannot allow to happen is we can't let that competition increase the complexity and confusion with heterogeneous pathways and heterogeneous processes. We have to recognize that all recruitment needs to be ethical, but if we can do this right, given this global crisis, we can have Canada as a destination of choice for physicians who choose to migrate. More importantly, for those who are already here, we can bring clarity as opposed to confusion to the pathways that are accessible to them. We know from our exams that we leave 1,000 candidates every year on the table after they've demonstrated the competencies that show that they're ready for supervised practice and moving on to licensure potentially because they can't access enough residency and PRA positions. So my recommendations to this committee are threefold. One, let's bring clarity, not through a provincial and territorial lens, but through a national lens of the requirements for international medical graduates and set expectations so that the migrating doctor can make an educated decision if Canada is a destination, but more importantly, so that we can navigate those who are already here as opposed to having them try to understand the system. Number two is that we need to expand opportunities for supervised placements that can lead to licensure. That includes bridging programs and clinical assistant positions to address recency of practice, increasing our residency spots, and a dramatic expansion of our PRA programs, which we know are the most efficient way to get people to licensure. That includes the innovative Physician Assessment Centre of Excellence that you've heard about in Nova Scotia, of which we are a partner. That innovative program directly addresses the bottlenecks and capacity issues we see in this program. And finally, I think we do need to build upon our digital platforms like the National Registry of Physicians so that we have a single source of truth for credentials, for practice locations, for scope of practice. If we have that information, then we can remove the redundancy of redundant credential checks through the system. We can facilitate mobility between our provinces, and probably most importantly, do the HHR planning so that we don't end up in a situation like this in generations to come. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, merci, and miigwech.
Thank you very much. I now go to the Society for Canadians Studying Medicine Abroad, and I I'm going to call on Dr. Pawliak. Are you going to be the speaker, madam?
Actually, we're going to split it.
your time?
And Dr. Doug Monkley will speak first, and I'll speak second.
Right. Dr. Monkley,
Thank you, and good morning.
you have
I'm Doug
2.5
Monkley,
minutes.
and I have been a full-time emergency physician in a high-volume community hospital in Niagara for over 30 years. I've also worked in walk-in and urgent care, primary care settings, and as well, I'm the medical director for Niagara EMS, the ambulance service that provides care to over 500,000 people in our region. Niagara is a wonderful place to live and work. However, we too have an acute lack of family physicians, and we're designated as such by the Ontario Ministry of Health. That lack of physicians, both GPs and specialists, is felt in a number of ways. Clearly, to those individuals who do not have access to primary care, there is adverse health effects from lack of disease prevention, delayed diagnosis, and treatment. For those awaiting specialist consultation or surgery, those delays also have profound effects. However, there are other consequences to the lack of family physicians or after-hours physician services. Patients often have nowhere to go except to the emergency department. Provincial telehealth services, which are kind of risk-averse, will direct patients to the ED, as will doctors' offices. These factors are part of a systemic issue causing widespread emergency department overcrowding. And when EDs are overcrowded, ambulances cannot offload their patients, and therefore they are not available to respond to emergency calls. So, what are some of the solutions to this doctor shortage? There are 3,500 Canadian students studying in highly respected medical schools around the world. We need to provide a fair and equitable process for Canadian medical students studying abroad to obtain residency positions, and we need to remove the licensing barriers to enable these physicians to come home to practice in Canada.
You, Ms. Pawliak?
I wanted to indicate that, as Doug said, there are 3,500 of us studying abroad. 800 graduate every year. Last year, less than 200, 181, and we've had as low as 119 of those 800 apply to come back to Canada, not because they don't want to, because the barriers are so significant and so we're so unwelcome. IMGs are segregated from graduates at Canadian medical schools when applying for residencies. IMGs are limited for the most part to a small number of residency positions in small numbers of medical disciplines. In BC, out of 30 disciplines, we are able to apply to 4, most in family medicine. And only on the condition that when we're done licensing, that we have to work where we're told. This is why so few people come back home. They feel unwelcome, they feel they're second-class citizens, and it hurts. And it's simply not viable. And this is after we have proven that we have the knowledge and skills expected of a graduate. These barriers, despite having proven equivalency. So, as we advocate for equal opportunity, once substantial equivalency has been proven, every Canadian who meets the Canadian standard should have equal access to apply for resident physician jobs. And we also advocate for uniform exams. A lot of negative stereotype has arisen. Rich kids, which is simply not true. As a matter of fact, most of our constituents are not from well-off families. But the one thing that I want to advocate most strongly for is the revocation of Bulletin 230. When we have raised how sensible it is to have more doctors practicing, resident physicians provide necessary medical treatment. They get on the bus, they're working first day. And they're working right away. We ask the faculties of medicine, when we ask for more residency positions, even privately funded ones, we're told the faculty simply do not have the capacity to train more doctors. And that's why we have made an application for the revocation of Bulletin 230 in 2019, and it's been sitting despite problems, and stalling. Residency positions are job. Residencies provide necessary medical services. They're paid under a collective agreement. The Immigration Act requires that before a work visa is issued to a foreigner, the employer has to go through the labor market impact analysis to prove that foreigners are not taking away jobs from a Canadian. In 2010, faculties of medicine convinced Service Canada and Immigration Canada that they should not require this requirement, this analysis. And so foreigners come in and take faculty position, pardon me, they take residency positions and fellowship positions and displace the 1,000+ people that Varen was talking about.
Ms. Pauliuk, your time is up.
Okay?
Thank you. You can fill it in at the question and answer segment.
That if you want to hear it.
And answer segment. The first round is a 6-minute round. The 6-minute includes the question and answer. And I will do the same. I'll give you a 1 minute and a 30-second prompt. So we begin with the Conservatives. Mr. Major, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for coming out here today. Dr. Neg, did the Federal Immigration Department consult with the Medical Council of Canada on this year's Federal Immigration Levels Plan? Did the Federal Immigration Department ask for any data on the current capacity of Canada's healthcare system on this year's Immigration Levels Plan?
No, they did not.
Well, my next questions are for the Society for Canadians Studying Abroad, Medicine Abroad. So is the Federal Immigration Department approving permits that allow foreign doctors to train in Canada through the visa trainee program?
Sorry, I couldn't hear your question.
The Federal Immigration Department approving permits that allow foreign doctors to train in Canada through the visa trainee program?
Yes, without the LMIA process. So no analysis is the impact on Canadians. They are allowing it despite our objections, despite our application. They are ignoring our application to insist on finding out what the impact on Canadians is.
Once these visa trainees complete their medical training in Canada, do they stay to practice here, or are they required to return to their home countries to practice?
Under their contracts with their sponsor, they're required to return to their home country. And most of them do. Some of them ignore their contract and stay.
Why is the federal government approving work permits for foreign doctors to train in Canada under the visa trainee program, only to send them home afterward, while thousands of qualified Canadians studying medicine abroad can't secure a training spot here?
Do you want to take that?
Well, you both can answer. So.
Yeah, that's a darn good question. Very good question, why they're doing that. We know that this came about by the request of the faculties of medicine of Ontario, supported by the others. What's happening is that the faculties earn $100,000 of as an application. That's what they charge each year of these foreign physicians, so it's a very good source of income. Millions of dollars are earned every year by the faculty. They can use that money at their discretion, and so what they're doing is using, taxpayers' resources and our trained doctors to train these foreigners so that they can then have a lot of extra money for the purposes that they want, whether it's research or whatever. I'm not against them making money. What I'm against, what we're struggling with, is that Canadians are literally dying. They're not able to get back to work. They're losing their homes because they can't get their problems. And as a result of that, that should be far more important than the faculty being able to make a little bit extra money, so that literally thousands, as Varen said, there were 1,000 this year of qualified people ready to go to work, and as resident physicians, and that was not able. A few years ago, the Ministry of Defense wanted to fund 50 residents and the faculties said no, and they gave them 5. They said we have the capacity to do 5. The next year they did 8.
Nicely to my next question here. Thank you for that explanation. Are foreign-funded visa trainees using medical training capacity that could otherwise be available for Canadians who study medicine abroad? I think,
Absolutely. And the numbers are great.
Dr. Monkley, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, the teaching hospitals rely on residents. They're a source of good labor, and they provide a lot of the care in hospitals. I certainly believe there's capacity to train more.
How many Canadians are currently studying medicine abroad and are unable to obtain residency position in Canada after graduation?
There are 3,500 that are studying abroad. About 800 graduate every year. This last year, there were 181 off the top of my head that applied, but that actually is in response to more residency positions. In 2022, there were only 119 Canadians out of 800 that applied after graduation because of the barriers. The chances are so slim. It's in Australia, you're almost guaranteed.
Country is benefiting the most from the visa trainee program?
United States of America. Sorry, which countries from the visa trainees?
Visa trainees, yes, sorry. I've switched back to visa trainees.
Oh, sorry.
Which country
Saudi
is benefiting?
Arabia, there's
30
currently
seconds.
1,117 Saudi Arabians training in Canada at this time.
Okay. Before the federal government brings in more foreign doctors through immigration, should it first make sure that qualified Canadians who study medicine abroad can return home here to practice?
9 seconds?
Yes.
To answer. Liberals, Maggie Chi, Miss Chi. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to the Chair. And I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing today. Thank you for making the time to come to Ottawa on a chilly morning. It's getting colder and colder. So my first question is to Dr. Nick. You mentioned that the system in Canada, in terms of assessment, workforce planning, remains somewhat fragmented. From your vantage point, from what you see, where do you see the biggest misalignments are today, and what practical steps would you say that we can better link these systems so physicians who arrive ready to contribute can begin practicing sooner?
Well, I think that when you have a migrating physician, that we have to be very clear about what the requirements are and what the expectations are. Assessment and meeting a national standard does need to occur. That's not necessarily an examination, but rather a program of assessment. And I think we need to make all of that more clear upfront or upstream so that a person can make an educated decision before they come. As well, the realities are that all provinces and territories are looking to serve their constituents, and so we see nuances and heterogeneity in the requirements in different provinces. And I think if we can be more consistent and have a national approach to this would bring clarity again to those coming and those who are already here. By definition, we are a federated model, but where you look at countries that have a more of a national approach to this in this global competition, there's more clarity to the international medical graduate and trained physician.
And I just want to double click on the idea of that federal coordination piece. Could you sort of expand on that? Is it more sort of digital infrastructure and more data sharing? Is it more program design? Because you mentioned the excellence program of excellence in Nova Scotia. Does that play a role? How does it play a role?
I think similar to our residency match that is nationally based, similarly for our practice-ready assessments, we could move to a more national consistent requirement and application model. Again, both could be made more consistent. The advantage to that is when you have a mid-career physician, while repeating residency is an option and certainly something that we see people apply to, we know that that mid-career physician coming from abroad may be better served by a workplace-based assessment through practice-ready programs. If we can get more consistent in those practice-ready programs across all of our provinces and territories, both for primary care and for specialties, it'll bring clarity and a more national approach to that program in general.
Dr. Nick, and my next question is to Dr. Alexander. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. What you went through personally, transitioning from going from Australia back to Canada. And I know you shared your story of why you wanted to practice, which is I really deeply appreciate it, because I think there are many folks that are going through what you're going through right now. I know Dr. Nick touched upon sort of some of the coordination piece. I was wondering if you can expand on when you were going through the process, what was the most confusing part? And the second part to that question is what, from your perspective, what would help you navigate the process? What would improve in that process?
Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate the sentiment. I think in all honesty, the CARMS process is fairly straightforward. I think the biggest thing is just the limited access for any international doctors. So as Rosemary kind of alluded to, being from Vancouver, trying to apply to the University of British Columbia residency programs, there is only 4 options that I could have chosen from. If I had wanted to go into anything as a subspecialty, such as like a cardiology or endocrinology, that was completely off the table. I was not able to do that. Any kind of surgical positions, there was nothing available for me. So I was very grateful that I was trying to get into family medicine and psychiatry, but beyond that, there's limited capacity and the competition was just incredibly steep. So I think a way to kind of make it more transparent is just understanding why that might be the case, why you might be able to go somewhere and have the want or desire to practice in a certain specialty, but then trying to come home, understand why that's not available to you. And I think that's one of the major reasons why a lot of Canadians who I studied with abroad wanted to stay abroad, was just the option and the availability of the training for them to go into the program that they were committed to. Because coming back home, that was not an option.
For that. And this question, I'm not too sure who to whom, but I'll throw it out there. So, in terms of other jurisdictions like Australia or the UK, is there anything that you're seeing that works really well, that we could, sort of see a model that we could also sort of emulate in that sense? Who wants to start?
From my perspective, it seems like a waste of time and energy to be putting immigrant physicians who've been practicing in their country. I mean, there's nothing special about us. I mean, doctors are excellent all over the world, and forcing them to go through residency training. So, for instance, a neurosurgeon would have to do 7 years. Sorry? At any rate, in that way, if they were trained, as Dr. Naik talked about, then residency positions could be used for new graduates who are the ones who really need that period of time of experience in order to ensure public safety.
I now go to the Bloc québécois. Monsieur Thériault.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
I would like to address my first questions to Mr. Muckley and Ms. Pamliuk. You said that we should abolish the practice of the 2:30 bulletin, and that was established by researchers in Quebec and in Ottawa. The residents, the foreign students who come here, greatly contribute to funding faculties of medicine. So they're like the golden goose. And at the same time, there are Canadian students who go abroad who are unable to come back, who have difficulty coming back to the country. Does not relate to something we haven't spoken of since the beginning of the study, which is the fact that the federal state is not investing itself as much in science, including the health transfers. We could train more people here and we could bring our people back here if we invested the necessary funds. But the reason why we use the foreign students is that in some way they are a source of funding for us.
Our translation isn't working. So could somebody, was yours working?
I'll suspend until we get that fixed. I think by IT the volume is so low that you cannot get your translations out. So I don't know how we can deal with that.
This is the English interpretation. Can you hear me? This is the interpreter. You can hear me? Yes. Can you hear the English interpreter now?
There's a little thing above with the... Perhaps we can hear from the English interpreter.
Oh, yeah, I can hear
Oh,
now.
testing. Can you hear the English interpreter? Good. Thank you.
Donc, vous pouvez régler vous-même le volume.
Yeah.
We cannot start because the monitor.
We shouldn't have mics on when you're not speaking.
Est-ce que je reprends, Madame la Présidente?
Should I start over, Madam Chair, since they didn't understand my question?
Microphone, s'il vous plaît.
Madame la Présidente, je revendique.
So, Madam Chair, I would like my 2 minutes. It took me 2 minutes to ask the question, and they weren't able to answer because they didn't understand my question. So, I don't want to repeat it for 2 minutes.
Minutes and 9 seconds.
Il vous reste.
Non, Madame
Are
la
you
Présidente.
asking for more,
Je
Monsieur
revendique
Thériault?
d'avoir mon
No, I'm asking to have my 5 minutes to start over again. I asked a question. It took 2 minutes. There was a technical problem, meaning that they weren't able to understand my question. If I ask my question in 2 minutes, I can only ask one question. They only have 1 minute to answer.
5 minutes, Monsieur Thériault.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, hello again. So, the faculties of medicine did not don't have to prove that no Canadian is available to take up a residency. That's what you're recommending with the idea of abolishing Bulletin 230. At the same time, there are students who are Canadian who are studying abroad and who cannot come back in the normal stream of things. That's the problem that you described. We know, however, that practice is related to a need for funding in the sense that these students coming from abroad contribute greatly to the funding of faculties of medicine. And so, at its root, the problem that we're talking about is the disinvestment of the federal government in the training of people at the federal and provincial level. So they cannot offer positions to people from here because of that.
Is that there actually is there are organizations that have offered to fund residency positions for Canadian immigrants and Canadians studying abroad, such as municipalities, such as corporations large corporations who work in areas where they can't get employees to come because they don't have a doctor, ethnic communities who want a doctor that serves them in their, sensitive to their culture. The ministries of health have a monopoly over the funding. They do not allow other funding, and the faculty say they won't train. And they prefer to take foreign training. They turn on the tap. When they're done, they turn it off. And so what that means is that if I wanted to 5 today and the Ministry of Defense wants 20, that means that they have to coordinate, and it's going to be different every year. It is much easier just to turn on the tap and turn it off rather than train Canadians. There's funding outside the government. I do not think that I'm not talking about the funding of the universities. I mean, that's another matter. In terms of funding, I do not think that's the issue. The issue, there's private funding, and there's certainly the ministries of health could do better. The issue is training capacity, according to the faculties of medicine, that they simply can't do it because they're using our training facilities.
De formation.
The capacity for training of faculties of medicine is related to the resources. And the fact that they prefer to have foreign students means that they can do better for their own funding. So at the root of the problem, the federal government, whose responsibility is to not disengage itself, because now it's 21 cents per dollar, we're supposed to do a half and half. So if municipalities and other areas. There's a movie that was made in Quebec, La Grande Séduction, where a community tries to find a family doctor in their part of the country. If communities have to do things like that, it means that somebody's not holding their weight in terms of funding healthcare in Canada. That's my point.
What the faculties, if the government funded more, would that change what the faculties are doing? Or are they happier with just money that they can use at their discretion as opposed to monies? So I don't know the motivations of the faculties, but yes, there should be more funding. We certainly encourage them to fund more so that there can be more residency training. But if there was more funding, is funding to the universities at the root of this? They don't use the funding for training. They use it at their own discretion. And I did a Freedom of Information Act to find out whether it was related or not. The funding is not used for residency training. It's used elsewhere by the universities for how they want to.
7 seconds.
Est-ce que vous pensez que...
Do you believe that there's a kind of corporatism in the medical world by opening these opportunities?
So I'm going to move on to the next person in the second round. It's a 5-minute round, and it will be starting with the Conservatives, Ms. Conans. 5 minutes.
My question is for Dr. Alexander. Thank you all for coming today. Dr. Alexander, thank you for your heartfelt story. It sounds like it's been a difficult road, especially since any Canadian who's listening to this knows that we need family medicine and psychologists throughout the country. and we're desperate for them, in fact. So my question for you is, after you completed your medical education in Australia and decided to return to Canada, you knew you wouldn't be able to practice, or did you know that you wouldn't be able to practice is actually my first question.
Right away, no. I believe that I would still keep applying for residency positions. I took other work in the interim to try to sustain my family for the time while still trying for residency. But it was when the examination requirements changed on me that I was no longer eligible, and that's when I had to permanently shift.
Dr. Alexander, so you were given false expectations about your ability to practice in Canada after you arrived here, and I'm sure you're not the only one who has practiced, a Canadian who has practiced abroad who's given also those false expectations.
Yeah, to a certain extent, after the 2 years of applying for residency with no success, it did feel like the rug was kind of pulled out from under me, because now new requirements were required for me to even have the privilege of applying for a residency in Canada.
Was there an offer you received to stay and work in Australia in their healthcare system?
Absolutely. And I had to make a personal choice. I had an internship lined up in a rural hospital in Australia, and I made the active commitment to come home so that my wife and I could have our family closer to our family. And that was the sole decision why we came home.
That's amazing. Thank you for doing that. In your experience at the University of Queensland, how many other Canadians studying abroad do so with the intention of returning to practice in Canada, but end up accepting positions in systems like Australia or the United Kingdom?
Very good question. I would say the majority of Canadians, when we walked into, and I can at least speak for the 60 60 Canadians who were in my cohort, I would say the majority of them had the expectations to come back home after graduating. But I think going through the process of going to school and then understanding the need of the requirements of coming home to Canada, I would say more prepared themselves to go to the U.S. through the STEP programs to try to get residency in the U.S. as opposed to trying to come home to Canada. And then others settled on the fact that the lifestyle in Australia was very equivalent to Canada, and they could happily practice there after graduation. So I would say by second, third year out of 4 of medical school, most of the Canadians had already made up their mind that they were not going to even try to come home.
Thank you. I think you mentioned earlier 58 out of your class of 60 ended up staying in Australia or going to another country. So, and you were actively recruited by the government of Canada or from a medical association to come back?
No, I made that choice on my own to come back and to try to, I guess, luck the system of the residency matching here in Canada. So I knew my chances were quite low. I think what I fully understood was it was about 10% based on the applicants to available positions. So I took the risk, and I had assumed that I would have more time to try for the residencies, more time as in more than 2 years, but that was not afforded to me.
Yeah, I'm guessing that you would have loved to have stayed in Canada and done your studying instead of going abroad. So my question to you is about the visa trainees. This program is where international medical school graduates receive postgraduate opportunities in Canada, but then they study here, take up seats, but they have to leave after they study. I believe there's one of the board mentioned that. One of you mentioned that 1,017 Saudi Arabians were now in those seats.
30 seconds.
Does that concern you that you weren't able to study here and those seats were taken for study?
Absolutely. If the opportunity for a Canadian who funded themselves to go abroad, get the equivalent training, do the equivalent exams, and be able to try to come home and practice in their home country, to find out that there is foreigners who are paying their way to come to Canada, take up a training position. I know it's not necessarily a residency position per se, but takes the same seat from a physician who does the training, to not be able to then have something available to someone like myself. It reminded me back in, I think it was 2018, 2019, when the Saudi Arabian government had issues.
Mr. Alexander, we're over time.
Canadian positions, and there were hospitals in Ontario that were going to shut down because of it. That was really the first time that I heard about the foreign trained visa programs and the risk that it posed to the Canadian healthcare system.
Thank you very much. We've gone 36 seconds over time on that question. Just wanted people to try and be sticking to the time. Mr. Eyolfson, are you able, I'm going to suspend until we check if Mr. Eyolfson is able to do a question. Can you hear him?
Great.
You cannot hear him, Mr. Major?
Can you hear me now?
You might want to put your earpiece on. Thanks. Good. We can hear you. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay,
Eyolfson. We're back in session. Mr. Eyolfson.
Thank you very much.
5 minutes.
Sorry about the difficulties. Yes. Now, in regards to these, this may be a change since I was there. When I was in residency in the 90s, we had some of these international residents, particularly from Saudi Arabia. Now, if I understand, at the time I was there, these were not taking up spaces that residents could use. These were extra spaces created because of the extra funding and the money, top up to the medical school to help fund their programs. Has that changed, or is this still the creation of, an extra space for them, and that these are not taking available spaces from training programs?
That's a very interesting word, because extra, their argument to Immigration Canada was that these are extra because somebody else is funding them, not Canadians aren't funding it, that there's no Canadian funding, so they're extra. But in fact, they're not extra, because when Canadians ask for more training so that they could train Canadians, and there's funding made available so they can train Canadians, they say, sorry, we don't have the training capacity to do that. So in my respectful submission, extra is a narrative. How could it be extra if there are more than 1,000 Canadians who are ready to fill that job, and we're using our training resources in order to do that? It's kind of like this extra stuff is like McDonald's saying, well, we only have money that we're going to dedicate to foreigners, and therefore they're extra.
Well, sorry. I don't mean to cut you off. I have a limited time. And who is making these decisions? Is this a federal government decision? Is it the universities? Is it the provinces? Who is making this decision?
To exempt from the LMIA process, that decision was made by Immigration Canada and Service Canada on the request of the faculties of medicine, who wanted to use this as a means of income generation.
Okay, but this was driven by the faculties of medicine then?
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Yes. Now, Dr. Alexander, I am sorry for what's happened. I do understand the concept of the rug being pulled out from under you. I graduated medical school in 1993. They made a lot of changes to medical training at that time that affected many people at my time who, had certain plans for residencies, and because of the changes, that was pulled out from under them. And others that had gone on to the formal internship with the intention of working and then going into a residency no longer had that option. So I do feel that, and that this was not a change that a lot of people at the time thought was positive. And again, I just want to clarify, these were changes, again, was there, to your knowledge, was this a federal government decision, or was this done at the provincial level?
I don't know the official answer to that, but I would assume, based on the fact that it was a CARMS application issue, that it was done more so on a federal level than based on any of the individual programs.
All right, but okay, thank you. And Dr. Naik, you were talking about how we need to, achieve this cross-country coordination of, increasing the proper training spots and making sure that, any available, any medical graduate, from abroad, Canadian who's trained abroad is able to get a position. How does the federal government do that if we try and, make such a pronouncement and are pushed back on by the provinces who say this is a provincial responsibility, stay in your lane?
Well, thanks for the question. I think first and foremost, we need the data. The provinces and territories decide what training spots we need through CARMS. But I think the missed opportunity is around internationally trained physicians. Those are the ones who've actually finished their graduate training in another country and potentially even practiced. In such cases, the practice-ready assessment programs can rapidly bring someone to licensure in as little as 8 to 12 weeks. I think the federal government could have transfer payments to the provinces and territories directed to the establishment and expansion of these practice-ready programs. And I think regional hubs like the Physician Assessment Center of Excellence, like in Nova Scotia, are examples of how you can address the bottlenecks in terms of assessor capacity and assessment capacity that could be stood up across the country.
Okay. Thank you. And I actually agree with you completely.
5 seconds, Doug.
Okay, thank you. I would say that we've tried targeted funding before, and the provinces have basically torpedoed that. All right, I think that's my time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I now go to Mr. Theriault for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you. Dr. Nick, earlier you mentioned a global shortage. We know that the World Health Organization evaluates it to about 11 million people in 2030 that will be the shortage. And you said that we had to do a kind of ethical recruitment. OECD said that in 2021, Canada was above the world average with 24% rather than 19% in terms of the level of the recruitment of healthcare professionals trained abroad. How should one proceed? Is there a contradiction between our needs to bring people who are trained abroad here as opposed to an ethical recruitment?
Have obviously signed on to the World Health Organization's Ethical Recruitment, and Health Canada has also produced a paper on it. Having said that, people will migrate, and while we shouldn't actively recruit, we should certainly accept a potential passive migration. Having said that, I will say that there are countries in the world that aren't on the red list that are actually overproducing doctors from which we should actively recruit from. India, for example, has between 850 to 900 medical schools. And part of the purpose of the overproduction of doctors is for migration. We need to seize this opportunity because in a global competition, other countries are going to the countries that aren't red listed and doing some active recruitment. And we, too, could benefit from that.
Donc, vous avez identifié...
So you've identified countries that give intense training and which would be possible available resources. Other than India, are there other countries?
To do is recognize the training is heterogeneous and do the appropriate assessments, as well as look at countries that where training might be felt to be substantially equivalent to Canada, where those trainees or those doctors could walk on without any or minimal assessment.
Thank you very much. I now go to Mr. Strauss for 5 minutes, please. And we will finish this bang on time, guys, with the full 1 hour. Good?
Chair. Dr. Nick, thank you for coming. For everyone's information, what exams in total does the MCC administer?
The MCC three examinations. One is the qualifying examination, which is a written examination, multiple choice, issued in countries around the world, issued over 100 days of the year in 4 different sessions. So no barrier to taking that exam. That is an exam that is done usually at the end of medical school prior to supervised practice of residency. We also have an OSCE examination, which is used for the purpose of selection into residency programs. And then we do have a selection exam as well that is used with variable uptake for our practice-ready programs.
Thank you. And then just top line, how do the success rates or the pass rates of Canadian medical school graduates, Canadians studying abroad, and other IMGs differ?
Our Canadian medical graduates are highly successful on our examinations at the end of medical school, but ranging between 80 to 98% on their first attempt and goes up with second and third attempts. International medical graduates, again, with different curriculum and recognition that we do ask about Canadian-specific competencies like Indigenous health and other cultural competencies, their success rate on the first attempt is usually 50%. Canadians studying abroad are somewhat in between of that. And part of that reflects the fact that they come with some of the Canadian context to their training. And the reality that some Canadians are studying abroad at schools whose purpose is to ready those graduates for return to Canada. And so the curriculum and the exam preparation is geared to that. And so their pass rates tend to reflect closer to that of Canadian medical graduates.
You mentioned that the MCCQE Step 1 is administered internationally.
Correct.
Are you aware, does success on that exam prior to immigrating to Canada affect your chances at immigration? Is the immigration ministry aware of that? Do they take that under account?
It does not impact immigration per se, but it is an examination that we are advising and trying our best to inform candidates that they should do before submitting their application for immigration.
As I recall from my own time writing these exams, they're good exams. They're pretty difficult exams. They are administered in English or French. I would have a really hard time passing those exams if I didn't speak English or French. Do you think that these exams effectively prove language fluency?
Yeah, and we have also worried about language being a confounder, and we do again advise candidates to take their English equivalency or their OET or their other exams before they do these exams for that reason.
And then in my years writing the exams, and then I worked at a couple different medical schools teaching medicine, I don't recall anyone having the old exams for the MCC exams, and this was in contradistinction to the Royal College exams. Is that about your understanding? What accounts for that difference?
I think the difference is that with respect to our examinations, we have many practice examinations that are equivalent to the real examination available to candidates. And in that regard, we hope that we create equity in the system by having that available to Canadian grads and to international grads.
I just want to say that I think it does, and I think you do, and thank you for that. I have a couple other questions for Ms. Pauliak. You mentioned about 800 Canadians studying abroad graduate every year from medical school. Only 100 and some apply to come back. Of that 100 and some, what is their success rate at finding a residency here?
It depends on the year. So, for instance, when there were only 119, the success rate was quite good, with only 23, off the top of my head, give or take, not matching. However, the higher the number of that come back, the lower the success rate.
Of the 700 or so who don't apply to come back, where do they tend to land?
Almost all of the people who study in Australia end up staying in Australia, not because they wanted to, but they feel they have no choice. The next largest group goes to the United States. More than twice as many CSAs end up working in the United States, training in the United States and in Canada.
This is not a question. I just want to say that's totally crazy that we're sending Canadian kids to pay $250,000 to get medical training elsewhere and then leaving them to the depredations of the American healthcare system when they could be serving our country and when that's where they want to serve. A couple of times you mentioned that I guess there's a difference between residency seats and residency capacity. So if these visa trainees are using an OR as an anesthesia trainee and they have a preceptor, then they're taking capacity even if they bring their own funding. You mentioned a couple times private funding for Canadians studying abroad. What are the sources of this private funding?
1 second.
municipalities, corporations, community groups, ethnic groups, foundations, nonprofit foundations.
You. I now go to the final questioner for the Liberals, Mr. Pulowski.
Let me start off by saying, particularly to Dr. Alexander, we share your frustration. I'm long practicing physician as well, but as the Member of Parliament, it is certainly frustrating that there are a lot of communities in my riding, rural communities, that really need doctors, and we look at someone like you and say, what the hell? And so part of the problem is the fact that a big part of the bottleneck in getting foreign trained doctors credentialed is they have to go through the provincial licensure before they can actually practice. Now, interestingly, and Dr. Naik mentioned that the Medical Council of Canada was created by an act of Parliament when back in 1912. And in addition, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons sets national standards. So although the regulation of the professions is something within the provincial jurisdiction, it obviously has, and there is a federal component to that as well. So as my good friend Don Davies, who is now departed, the NDP member, often said, this is an area of shared jurisdiction. So having said that, and I know, Dr. Naik, someone kind of preempted my question, what more can we do to address the problem of getting foreign trained people credentialed? You've talked about practice-ready assessments. I would note that the federal government in 2023 gave $500,000 to the Medical Council of Canada to assist in this. You've talked about making practice-ready assessments and access to practice-ready assessments perhaps a condition of transfer payments from the federal government to the province. I'd say there's difficulties with that because the feds can say we want this or that, but will the provinces actually do it? What can we do if they don't do it? Since it's an area of shared jurisdiction, since this is something we want to address, we want to get more foreign trained people credentialed, is there an avenue that we could put directly federal money into trying to do more to have more people go through the practice-ready assessment program?
That Dr. Alexander and Rosemary and team have said that the CARMS process is pretty clear. So that's for the graduate who just finished medical school. I think for the heterogeneity for the internationally trained physician to the practice-ready assessment is felt not just by the trainee, but by the practice-ready assessment programs themselves. I think they would like to and be on side because the governance of those programs, some are in regulators, some are in universities, some are run by an external party. But they all are hungry for a national approach, a national intake, a national matching process, so that they're not diverting resources to that recruitment and the challenges.
Who do you see as what body would take on that responsibility?
I think that could be a consortium. We stand as stewards of the National Assessment Collaborative that started the Practice Ready Assessment in 2017. So we have a working group, I'll say, and committee that comes together of the Practice Ready programs. And a desire for a centralized intake would not only be welcome by them, but would also be welcome by the candidates to have one application process, just like CARMS, and know where those practice-ready programs could be available. On the other end of practice-ready assessment, I think that we could stand up national programs to support the graduate after they leave the practice-ready assessment. One of the biggest challenges, obviously, is their experience and how we best support them for success in rural and remote communities.
Do you think the provinces would be on board with having such a national program?
I think that, again, the governance of these practice-ready assessment programs live, not with the government. And I think that the governance and the people who are running the practice-ready assessment programs would welcome it. And I think if they're the ones who are the voices to the government, then it would be accepted.
Top-up programs, we've heard about that from other witnesses, foreign trained doctors, perhaps they need 6 months, a year, 2 years.
30?
I don't see a lot of provinces or teaching hospitals doing that. Do you know anywhere where they have those sort of top-up programs, and what more can we do to add those as a way of getting foreign trained doctors?
Manitoba is the leader in this. It's a bridging program about both an on-ramp and an off-ramp for practice-ready assessment. We're seeing some uptake in other provinces like Nova Scotia through hospitalist programs, and where we have clinical assistants, which is essentially working under supervised practice, like in British Columbia. That again is a marker of success when you move the person then into a practice-ready, high-stakes assessment to move them to more independent licensure. So there are examples, and we could absolutely nationalize that.
Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of the session. And before I thank my witnesses, I wanted to say, Dr. Alexander, I know exactly what's happening with you. My son went to study at University of Sydney, and he, against my better advice, did that because he got a full scholarship from the University of Sydney. He stayed there, and they do a 5-year residency program in emergency medicine. And so I now have to travel to Australia to see my grandchildren. So I feel your pain. I understand it, and we can do. But he actually decided to stay because he was given all kinds of perks to stay in Australia. Thank you very much.